Welcome to URL Unzip, Reboot and Leave, a podcast about the psychology that moves us. Through real conversations with thinkers, doers, and seekers, we explore how we adapt, evolve, and find meaning. So let's unzip, reboot, and leave. Welcome to another exciting episode of URL Unzip, Reboot, and Leave. Today, our guest is a professor in Monash University. He is the founder director of education at Monash Centre for Consciousness and Contemplative Studies, M3CS. He developed a medical curriculum in Monash medicine and integrated into the world first mindfulness-based healthy lifestyle course called Health Enhancement Program. He authored more than 16 books. Please welcome Professor Craig Hassed. How are you, Professor?
Very well, thank you, Gautam. Great to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. So today our topic is psychology of consciousness, because that's what you are working in that center. So before going into consciousness, because all the time these days we are hearing this word mindfulness. So what exactly is mindfulness?
It's about paying attention in the present moment, but with an attitude of openness, acceptance, if you like. So attention and attitude are both involved. And when people talk about practicing mindfulness, then the two main ways of doing that are the formal practice, that is mindfulness meditation. So that's what most people think about mindfulness is sitting down and meditating, which is part of it, but that's only part of it, because the other part is living mindfully. So being present, paying attention with an open attitude as life unfolds moment by moment. And people say, what is mindfulness as well? Because of all of the things that flow on from that, being able to manage our emotions better, motivation coming from a deeper place, and so on, that people talk about it as an emotion regulation technique, as a way of managing stress, a way of improving performance. But they're all, if you like, the side effects of mindfulness. In its essence, as I said, it's attention and attitude, and is practiced through the formal and informal practice of mindfulness.
In this era of digital distraction, if you like, where attention is the new currency, how to kind of nail it down to our head about this?
The world, because selling us product and various things, there's this war constantly fighting over trying to get our attention the whole time. And devices are designed to be addictive, not metaphorically, but literally addictive. And so increasingly these days we're not present, not just because of technology, but the faster pace of life. So increasingly we're not present. And it's become a bit of an epidemic these days. So we shouldn't be surprised in this distracted age, but an age when more and more people are very stressed and distressed, that there's an interest in mindfulness as a kind of a remedy to these modern ills, if you like.
So meditation, or let's say for a layman or most of the people, calming your mind, what exactly happens in brain, body, and energy or soul level with this meditation?
You see, when we're doing one thing, and it could be a mundane thing like washing the dishes, or paying attention in a meeting at work, or driving our car, if we're just present with that one thing in the moment, life more often than not tends to be reasonably simple. The series of simple moments and events as we flow throughout day-to-day life. But unfortunately, what happens when we're not mindful is we're doing one thing, but we're actually thinking about the other 1,000 I've still got to do when this finishes. So I've got so many deadlines, I've got this, I've got to fit that in, I've got to shop and get some things on the way home tonight. And the mind's thinking about 1,000 things. So all of a sudden we're losing focus on the one thing we're doing in the moment, but we're doing mentally 1,000 days work in our head. That has a flow-on effect onto the body. It creates a lot of stress in the body. It's like, if you imagine the body as a car, it's like the car is being revved and driven hard the whole time. So we go through our fuel faster, we put more and wear and tear on the car. The term given for that is allostatic load. It's a physiological wear and tear we put on our body. And that accelerates aging, it increases the risk of heart disease, it dysregulates the immune system, it accelerates the aging of the brain, it leads to increased DNA damage and accelerated aging on the level of the DNA. I mean, I could go on, but it's not good for our mental health and it's also not good for our physical health. So when we reverse that, yes, we've got 1,000 things to do in the day, but at any given moment, we're just doing one thing at a time and we do it mindfully. Then we switch down, we down regulate all of that stress response that we don't need. So the body starts to repair and become more efficient and works better. So it's good for our physical and our mental health.
In other words, are you talking about, is it related to multitasking? Because in one, I read somewhere that corpus callosum, which is physically thicker in female cases, which kind of connector between left and right brain. Because of that, female are a little bit more like a multitasker, but men are not. But you are basically saying just stop doing multitasking, just focus in one
Mm.
task. Is that right?
Yes, so multitasking is a bit of a modern myth. Now, mind you, we should define, so multitasking is complex multitasking is one of the worst things we can do for our attention and our performance. We've got different ideas about what we think multitasking is. So complex multitasking would be if you're trying to do two complex things at exactly the same time. So if I'm trying to have this conversation with you at the same time as I'm trying to send some text messages, which won't happen to me because I don't have a mobile phone. I like to keep my life very, very simple.
Wow.
But if you're, thank you. But if you're driving your car and you're having a conversation on your phone while you're doing it, so two complex things at the same time, that's complex multitasking. If we're doing one thing that's simple and the other one that's complex, then that's simple multitasking. So if you're walking through a park, having a conversation with a friend, walking is simple, you're not walking in a complex environment, and talking is complex. Simple multitasking, not a problem. But complex multitasking is a problem. So if we're trying to drive while talking on a mobile phone, we're 4 times as likely to have a motor vehicle accident compared to if we're just driving. This is the kind of impact that it has because we're not paying attention to two complex things at the same time. Our attention's having to flick back and forward. So that starts to become very inefficient and our brain ceases to process information very well. So we get things out of sequence. We don't recognize what's important, what's not. So your attention is on the phone, something happens on the road, your attention, there's a lag time to coming back, and all of a sudden to process what's happening, and a lag time before the foot goes on the brake, and you have a bad accident instead of a very minor one. So complex multitasking is terrible for the attention. It's terrible for performance, for memory, increases stress, has a very negative impact on the brain. So the thing about doing one thing at a time is that it keeps things simple. Now, mind you, you could be in a complex environment. So medicine's my background, although I'm not working in clinical practice anymore. But in an emergency situation, you need attention like a laser beam. One moment you're reading the monitor, the next moment your attention moves to feeling the pulse. The next moment the attention goes to the patient, asking the patient a question. The next moment it goes to picking up a IV cannula and putting that cannula in the vein to. So the attention's moving, but you're not doing multiple things at the same time. You're doing one thing, but successively you're focused on that one thing that you're doing. Let's call that efficient attention switching. All right, as opposed to complex multitasking. You're focused on the one thing at that moment that needs your attention, and you're doing it in a very present moment kind of way. That's what people do when they're efficient and effective, even in very complex environments. That's a very mindful thing to do. So if people think mindfulness is just sitting down and just meditating all the time, etc., no. If you're a Formula One driver, and I could name a few Formula One drivers who practice this kind of stuff, because you need your attention right on the road when you're driving over 300 kilometers an hour, down the straight, you need to be very much in the present moment.
With this mindfulness activities, few words are also coming with it, which is compassion and empathy. So how this mindfulness kind of enabled us to increase those?
Yeah. It's interesting. Some of the early work in the mid 2000s, it was looking at mindfulness and its impact on emotional intelligence, found that emotional intelligence significantly increases. And research on health professionals found that they became more empathic. And empathy is a very important part of emotional intelligence. So, an empathy is one's ability to resonate with how somebody else is feeling. So somebody might be happy and you kind of feel their happiness, but somebody could be very, very sad or distressed, or angry or anything else, and you can feel that as well. So our ability to resonate with how somebody's feeling, it's a very important part of being a social creature like human beings are. But what often happens is, say if we're in the presence of somebody who's distressed, it's very easy for us to get distressed about their distress. So that's sometimes called vicarious stress or empathic distress. So we recognize how somebody's feeling, but the stress circuits in our brain are lighting up like they are for the person who's in distress. Now, compassion is very different neurologically, physiologically, emotionally. And so what happens with compassion? The empathy arises, and empathy is very good and it's very, very healthy. But the next step is into compassion. And in compassion, the stress areas don't light up, but areas of the brain associated with love and care do light up. What happens is areas of the brain associated with motivation and action light up as well. That is a complete readiness and openness to help in whatever way one can. So rather than the reactivity that often comes with empathic distress is a calmer, more present and considered ability and openness to help. So the person's able to be fully present. So mindfulness helps compassion enormously. The person's more able to be present with the distress, able to feel comfortable with the distress. If I could use that term, sounds like a bit of a paradox, but an accepting attitude that this is the moment that's happening, but attention stays fully with the person who's experiencing the distress to find out, to explore, to see what way one might be able to help. Empathy and compassion are complementary things, but compassion does not lead to burnout. Empathic distress does.
Just another question, sympathy, is it like a much lower grade of emotion or just it's a superficial level?
Yeah, sympathy, again, closely related to empathy, but just feeling sympathy for somebody is one thing, but compassion is a very motivating thing. Brings the person to act. So you might be somewhere and somebody's getting help on an accident by the roadside, and there's nothing you can do in that situation. You might feel empathy, you might feel sympathy, but the compassion, the extra step in there is to help in whatever way one can. So it's a motivating, activating kind of thing. Now sometimes we can do something to physically help the person who's injured or whatever. In other situations, it might be what one can do to help is just with compassion to just hear the person out, give them space to speak about, what their concerns are. There's no one, we can't always solve a person's problem, but if we're a compassionate presence, calming presence with that person, then that can provide an enormous amount of help as well.
It sounds like it's more than awareness based approach rather than evidence based scientific approach. How these things started and how, okay, and the next big question which I'll come, which is how you define consciousness. So how these things started first?
Yes, well, the Monash Centre for Consciousness and Contemplative Studies, there was already at Monash a lot of work in the mindfulness space. So I've been doing with a number of other colleagues, and Monash has been tremendously supportive for all of that. sort of work over many, many years. And then somebody who I previously hadn't crossed paths with, but a professor of philosophy who has a whole area of research was in consciousness science. And so when a philanthropist came along and said, I'd be interested to fund a centre for contemplative studies, we actually connected, and the university was tremendously supportive for our proposal for a centre of consciousness and contemplative studies. So to expand it, so it's actually very much involved with education and teaching and training and so on, but also very much involved with research. So so there's a very active research program there as well. So it's very much evidence-based, to do the primary science, to understand what's going on in body and brain in different states of consciousness, etc., but also to understand about how this plays out. How does it change how we live and interact with others?
And then the biggest question, how you define consciousness?
Well, I should probably just sit in silence now, and then that will be my answer.
Is that simple?
No thing. It depends a little bit on the perspective that one takes. From, say, a wisdom tradition perspective, consciousness is just the pure awareness, just that existence, just the thing that makes us conscious of being alive, etc. So just that pure awareness. If I could use a metaphor, to be like the light, the formless light that just lights everything up, makes everything visible, makes everything us aware of everything. From a consciousness science point of view, they use the term consciousness in a slightly different way to talk about things like levels of consciousness, or the different states of consciousness, and understanding how our awareness interacts with the world. So, and there are all sorts of various theories. So it's less about the pure consciousness itself and more about understanding the things that are lit by that consciousness. So describing the world, the brain, the body, how they all work together, and how our state of consciousness affects our experience of the world, our way of interacting with the world. So, but I think that light metaphor is probably the best single way to explain it, as far as I can tell. That the consciousness as the light, and then there's all the things that are lit by the consciousness. So it depends on what you're referring to.
Now, I have an observation, maybe I'm wrong. So before, with all this technology and this thing, we used to have a lot of physical struggle to do something. And more we are equipped with this technology, machines and all these things, it's the whole struggle is becoming more psychological. The Vedanta or the Stoicism, they say that suffering is an invitation of self-knowledge or whatever. Do you see that our struggle remains same? Just the way or approach is different now.
Yes, it's a curious thing that in a time of relative affluence, historically speaking, and relative comfort, like the comforts and the convenience and the affluence we have now compared to 100, 200, 500 years ago, is extraordinary. And yet we seem to be more stressed and distressed. So these internal struggles, worries, expectations, desires, disappointments, and so on, we expect so much more, we want so much more, and that seems to leave a lot of room for stress and distress. So it is a curious thing that our mental health is declining, and has been for decades now, mainly in developed countries. We would think that material affluence would be the solution to our problems. Now, mind you, there is nothing particularly wonderful about terrible poverty, etc. All of that material affluence and so on is fine and to be welcome to an extent, but it's strange that it's not leading us to feel more at peace with ourselves and peace with the world. So yes, a lot of our struggles are very much internal, hopes and fears and anxieties and so on, so much more. And I think because perhaps to some extent we're leading a less connected life with nature and with other people in society and living a more virtual life on screens, etc. We're kind of losing some of that sort of connection that draws us out of ourselves. The physical labor-saving devices that we don't have to use now, I mean, but they're a great way of bringing you into the present moment, when you, and so on. But so in a kind of a way, there's a lot that means that we're turning in on ourselves, and so sometimes it's a great blessing to have things to just draw our attention out, to bring us back to the moment, to the tactile sensory experience of being alive, for children especially. That play, that way of playing and interacting with the environment and the world is very, very important developmentally and for the brain. But when children, all their play is becoming screen-based and they're not interacting, not being physically active in the same way, that's terrible for children's attention and development. So, we're going to compound these problems perhaps for a little while longer before we rethink and say, well, technology is a wonderful thing and can do so many wonderful things, and let's use it well, but let's not have our lives run by the technology. Let's get back to basics as well.
As you mentioned children, I have two teenage daughters, and what I am observing with them that until they are in year 9, year 10, or in high schools, if you are not in serious sports, apart from romantic failure, there is no other failure in life. Right? And because we are also more resourceful, less children, so they are getting more and more cushioning. And that lack of failure is building lack of resilience in them. Is it a right or observation, or how you see it?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of concern about a relative lack of resilience that many kids have now. That struggle is not bad, failure is not bad. That's how we learn. Shouldn't even perhaps call it failure, just call it learning, difficult life lessons. In many ways, a lot of people are raising this kind of issue that trying to cushion children from adversity and challenge rather than learning to engage with it, learning to grow through challenge. We may be doing children perhaps a bit of a disservice. I mean, it's always going to be a balance because, in a kind of a way, there is a level of protection that children need, especially, the younger they are, that there is that important role. But there's also a very important role for helping children to expand their boundaries safely and to learn and to, take on challenge, to learn to feel comfortable with not having to be successful all the time and not having to be praised all the time. So, and that's the difference between that and criticizing harshly and so on. So these are things. There's a difference between that learning to grow through challenges and I'm not sure that we're navigating that very well collectively at the moment, and that kind of fragility. I mean, it's a big concern that more and more children these days are having anxiety issues. Some of the latest data from Australia and around the world, about 50% of young women or girls having anxiety issues, and about 39% of young males. And so clearly something is not working there. We need to perhaps rethink. That's one of the reasons why there's a lot of interest in mindfulness for children and adolescents as well as adults. And there are many, many studies that have been published now showing that mindfulness-based approaches, when delivered by well-trained mental health professionals, can significantly reduce the relapse rates for depression, significantly help with anxiety and stress and so on, can really help children if they learn and practice it effectively. Because our consciousness, our attention, is a very important commodity, and we need to use it carefully. And if we're feeding all of our attention into negative self-talk and self-criticism and worry, etc., then it's powering all of that. It's giving in a sense, the kind of the energy that consciousness has, and it's feeding all of that really negative patterns of thinking. So one of the things that mindfulness does is it helps us to use our consciousness in a more discerning way. So it can kind of be a greater sense of reason or rationality in that. We can unhook the attention from the things that are really not very helpful and give more attention to the things that are useful and that we want to get on with in our lives. So if you can give a child a present like that of learning how to use their attention and their awareness and use their minds in a better way, then you've given that child a great gift for the rest of their lives that will be useful not just for their mental health, but in all sorts of practical ways and how they get on with their careers and how they motivate themselves, etc.
So am I coming back to consciousness again? So can consciousness ever be objectively studied?
Well, the wisdom traditions would probably say not that pure consciousness, the formless consciousness, because it's kind of beyond the mental and the physical, and it's what's illuminating that. So you'd find that the wisdom traditions would probably say, no, sorry, can't can't do that. But from a consciousness science perspective, the way that consciousness manifests itself in physical and mental ways, yes, you can study that. And it's one of the big debates in philosophy and consciousness science and so on is, well, what comes first? Does physical matter come first, or does consciousness come first? Because from a material science perspective, physical matter comes first. And then when it gets sufficiently complex and the brain forms and gets complex and evolves over millions and millions of years, eventually you get mind and then you get consciousness out of the physical matter. But nobody can explain how dumb physical matter leads to consciousness. That's called the hard problem of consciousness. So science is racking its brains to explain, how does physical matter lead to a conscious being? Me here experiencing the world. Nobody's come close to explaining that. So from the wisdom traditions, and indeed from some of the more philosophical physicists, particularly in the last century, they said, and many of these were Nobel Prize winners, they said, actually, consciousness is primary. That's where it all starts. And out of that, you get mind and matter. But it all starts in consciousness. Nothing exists without consciousness. So that's one of the big debates going on these days. And we can all make our own minds up where we sit, on what side of that fence we sit. But constructive dialogue about that, I think, is going to be one of the most interesting things to unfold in the next 10 or 20 years.
Right. It sounded like in Vedanta or in Hinduism, we call it Brahman. So we are Brahman, or our quest is basically to crack who we are. Studying consciousness, is it approaching the same line from a scientific way?
Well, look, I think people are going in different directions. So, certainly there's a lot of interest, especially since the growth of interest in mindfulness, to actually understand ourselves. And people talk about no self. That is, we're not the ego that's rattling around in our heads and all our preoccupations about ourselves. So that's not what we are. And many, many pursuing that line of thought are coming back to similar conclusions to what great wisdom traditions have said for a long time, like Vedanta, that we just are. The self is that pure consciousness. It's no thing. It's not, But from a consciousness science perspective, trying to define it, trying to pin it down, that's not so easy. But if consciousness is, as the wisdom traditions describe, then you can't really measure it. You can't pin it down. You can't put it in a jar and take it somewhere. It's kind of slips through the fingers, I suppose you'd say.
The last question, which is also a very big question: God. Is it a metaphor, a mystery, or a reality beyond concepts?
Right. Well, we're getting on to the big questions here, Gautam, but I think when we use a word like that, we can have all sorts of ideas about it and so on. You know, some would say, well, it's just a fabrication of the human imagination. You know, so others would say that you know it's the laws and the principles in nature that make things work the way they do. Others would say, well, actually, it's just that pure awareness. It's just that existence that enlivens everything. And many traditions would say, well, it's only in deep, deep stillness and presence that we can actually have any experience of or knowledge of what is God, what is the ultimate truth of our being, what is in us that is unchanging amidst all of this changing temporal existence. And it's only in deep, deep stillness that we can actually know that, not just in theory.
Okay. So, on that, hopefully, we will go closer and closer to the truth and we will have a better well being. So, thank you, Professor. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Gautam. It's been a pleasure.